So here I'm going to have my measuring ruler, so you have an idea exactly what size of ball I need or I'm working on. So about the third to the largest. There you go. So I'll take that ball and shape it into a long teardrop, almost like a carrot shape. About, let's say, 1.25 inches in length. Then I'll take a 2-inch 26 gauge floral wire. You can use white or green, whichever you prefer. I'll bend that into a hook, like an open hook, using my long needle nose plier, and dip it in my glue, and I would insert it on the fatter end of the teardrop. There we go. Make sure that the gum paste is all filled up with that gum paste so it doesn't come off after it's dry. Then I'm going to flatten the tip just a tiny bit, like so. And cut both ends. Okay, so after that, then you can take your one of your gum paste tool, called the Dresden tool, the one that looks like a foot almost, and I'm using the narrower side, or the narrower tip, and I'm just going to press it underneath and bend those hand looking tips that I made, and so it's hollow on the underside, as you can see. Okay. Make that rounder. So this is one of the tips, or one of the first part of the throat, and I'll just put it on my foam to dry. So just let it dry. Another thing that you can also do, I'm using the same amount of gum paste that I used earlier. And this is actually closer to how the tip of the throat of the Cattleya looks like. The first one that I showed you is how my professor, or my teacher, taught me how to do it like 20 years ago. And when I see a real Cattleya now, it's actually more of like a paw. So I just did the same teardrop that I did earlier, and I'm just flattening the fatter side this time. I'm going to take my 26 gauge wire and bend it into a hook just like I did earlier. Oops. I'll dip it on my glue, wipe off the excess, and then I'm going to put this, or I'm going to insert this in the narrower side of it. Now the fatter side, I'm going to take my needle tool, or even this tool that I got from the pottery aisle of the arts and crafts store. This is just a cheap plastic tool. I think I bought it for like $3 or $4. And I'm just going to make a crease or like a line on one side, and you can also, I'll show you how you can use your needle tool as well and just use the side of it. And it almost looks like a paw looking thing. This is how I'm gonna, if I'm making a character like a dog or a cat, this is how I'm going to make the foot of it. And the same thing, I'm going to take that tool that I used earlier and just make that indentation at the back side. So this is another way of doing it. So I'll show you the difference of the two center throats that I made. This is actually the one that I showed the first time, and this one is the one that's shaped like a paw. This one is really how the Cattleya looks like, and this one I think is because it's just more dramatic. So it's your choice which one of these you wanted to use. So you just let this dry. This one is already dried. I've dried it for about 24-48 hours. So I'm just conditioning this gum paste so it's nice and supple. And I'm going to roll it so that the lower part is thicker than the rest of it. And this is the veiner. As you can see, this is the wide side. So when you cut that, that is where that goes to, is at the bottom of the throat. And so I'm going to use this wider side and press that onto my gum paste where this is the thicker part. See? And cut it. I first press it down and then shake it a little bit. That way I get a really clean cut. And as you can see, that is thicker than this side. So now this is the most dramatic part of the orchid, and so I'm just going to thin out this first scallop right here. I'm just going to thin it out from the top all the way to that part. And then I'm going to put it back on my vinyl pad. I'm going to take my needle tool and basically tear all of that. So it doesn't really matter how many tears you make per scallop. There we go. So I'm moving my foam pad to the edge of my table. That way I can twirl it using my needle tool without having the table on me and constricting my movement. Because as you will see, I am going to, the angle of my needle tool is about 45 degrees. Don't do it this way, because a lot of my students do it this way and it will tear that part of your gum paste. So you have to make sure that it's at a 45-degree angle and the tip of your needle tool is not touching the gum paste. So I will just go back and forth. As you see, I just stay on to where my needle tool can reach. I don't go all the way like that. I just stay to where I can move the needle tool back and forth. And it's important that you do it on the side of the table. That way your hands can move freely. And if it tears, like it's happening right now, it's okay. Because the more that it looks rugged, the better it is. Just make sure that you clean off all that excess gum paste that are tearing off. Or you can even rub this with a little bit of vegetable shortening so that the gum paste won't stick to it. So you see the difference between that one that I already twirled and this one that I haven't. There we go. So I'm going to brush some glue on the side to where the first scallop is, and I'm just wiping off all the excess with my fingers. And then I'm going to take the dried up throat, the first part of the throat that I did earlier, I'm going to take it between my forefinger and my thumb and stick it onto that first part of the throat that I did. And I'm just going to move my fingers to close that gap. You wanted to show the tip of the first part of the throat that we did earlier. So and now press it until the line is clean. And there we go. And just dry it on my foam pad. So now we're going to do the petal, or not, yeah, the petal part of the flower, which is the two wings. So I'm using the same shade of purple that I used for the throat. And I'm basically going to roll it just the same way as I did roll the throat. However, this time the only thing that you want to make sure is that you have the space for the stem wire. So the veiner for that is the one that looks kind of like a leaf, and I want to make sure that the base is where the thicker part is. So I'm just gonna cut that. Again, I press it down and then shake it a little bit so I get a clean cut. Then I'll take my 26 gauge wire and cut about 2 inches or 2.5 inches, whichever you prefer. And I'll bend it into an open hook, a tight open hook I should say. Like so. I'll dip it in some of my gum glue. I'll take my petal, put it upside down, and insert that wire in. I'll insert it about up to right here, about 1/2 inch, I would say, and close it. Make sure that you pinch it and close that, because otherwise, after the gum paste is dry, your stem wire is going to come off. So I'll take my foam pad again, just like I did earlier, and this time you don't need to slice it up. You just need to make sure that you twirl the edges. And I will take it again to the side of my table and just start twirling. So again, I am just rolling my needle tool, the side of my needle tool, back and forth. So after that's done, I'm going to take my ball tool. I kind of like, because I don't want it to be too closed, so I'm going to push it out a little bit with my ball tool. So you still have that curliness, but it's not as curly as the throat. And then I will just lay it down and take my Dresden tool. It doesn't matter which side you use. I'll tuck it inside underneath the petal. I'm tucking it underneath the petal and basically lifting it up and pushing the side down. So you see how this one's lifted up a little bit, so it doesn't lay as flat. So I'll just put it again on my foam pad, and I love to use foam to dry my petals because the underside is also the air circulates underneath as well, so both sides gets dry really fast. So I'll dry this for another 24 hours. I'll make another one for the other side of the flower. So here I have two that's already been dried, and so this is how it's supposed to look like. So for the sepal, I'm going to use the same exact gum paste that I used for the throat and the petals. I'm going to roll it long and narrow. Like so. And the sepal veiner is the one that looks like a corn husk almost. And make sure that the end is also touching the thicker side of your gum paste. That way it's veined all the way to where the stem wire goes. And of course the sepal cutter is the one that's long and narrow on your set. Make sure that there's a line that goes from vertically on the center, and that should be in the center of your cutter. So I'll take a wire. You can hook this or not. It's entirely up to you. I normally, if the petal exceeds about 2 inches in length, I wanted to make sure that my wire is hooked to make sure that it doesn't, spin when it's dry. And again, I just dipped it on my gum glue and insert it. So this one does not have any kind of movement at all. It's just basically a long, narrow petal. And what I'm doing is I'm basically thinning out the edges. And while you're thinning it, if it creates some movement on the petal, it's okay, because you can just correct it later on. So I'm just holding my ball tool like a pen, and I'm just basically outlining the edge of that petal. So you still have the center thicker than the rest. This one, you just wanted to thin it out so that it's thin on the edges. And then I'll just take my needle tool and run that from vertically from the center top all the way to where the stem wire is. Take that underneath and press the side down. That way it tapers more smoothly towards the stem wire instead of just like and then stem. And then this one, I like to use the large egg flower former, and I'll just dry it flat right there. And you can fit 3 or 4 per former, so you save space, because there's only like 2 formers that comes in one sheet, so you can make as many as like 6 or 6 sepals. So that's set for 2 flowers. So after all of our components have dried, it's time for us to dust. And I'm going to use Merlot petal dust. You can also use African violet, any other purplish reddish color that you can find in your collection of petal dusts. You can brush the underside with a little bit of apple green or lime. So I would dip my brush into my petal dust and tap it onto my paper. That way I don't use a whole lot of petal dust, because if you go from the container to your flower, sometimes you get a whole lot of petal dust in there and you can't control how much of those actually gets transferred to your flower. And sometimes it's like adding salt. You can always add, but you cannot. It's almost impossible to take off. So I'm gonna use a lot of this Merlot petal dust, because the throat, I am going to dust all of it. So I'm starting at the very bottom of it, and I'm just going to brush it all over, because I want this to be the most dramatic part of the flower, which is the darkest part of the flower as well. Okay, so for the assembly, you're going to have 2 of your petals, 3 of your sepal, and of course your throat. And I'm going to take a half width of my floral tape, and I use this contraption. This is manufactured by Gem. It has a blade inside that cuts it in half. Just makes my life so much easier, and you just pull it and it cuts in half for you. But of course, if you don't have that contraption, you can always just use a scissor. And I like to use half a width of floral tape, because then it doesn't make my stem too thick, and you just basically have to stretch it so that it releases its adhesive. And as you can see, it doesn't really stick to anything except to itself. So I'm going to take my floral, or my throat, and take one of my petals and bend the wire. And as you can see, I will hold the tip of my petal and bend the wire. This way I don't. If you do it this way, you run the danger of breaking your petal. So you want to make sure that if you need to bend the wire, that you hold the wire and hold it on the tip so that it doesn't break. So I'm going to take that petal and position it on one side of my throat, and this is going to be on the 3 o'clock position. And I will take the tip of my tape and hold it with my forefinger and wrap that twice, the stem twice. That way it wouldn't fall off, and it basically holds itself. And I will go to the opposite way and wrap the wire all the way to the tip so that I don't see the wires at all. There we go. So as you can see, I don't see any of the wires from the to where the gum paste meets. I'll take the other one and place it right on the opposite side. And just wrap it again, and this time I can just wrap it twice because I don't have to secure the whole thing. And because these are large components, it would still move, and it will continue to move until you wrap the the end of the wire. So if it moves, that's okay. Just make sure that you know where it is. Now take one of my sepals and position it on the 12 o'clock position, right in the middle. And then the two bottom sepals, I'll position it on the 7 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 7 o'clock position. And as you can see, I'm just wrapping the edge to where or the very top of the flower to where the gum paste and the wires meet. That way I secure all of them first, and I usually wrap it twice to make sure everything is secure, and then I'll take my tape and angle it to a 45-degree angle and start wrapping. Make sure that it's at that angle, because otherwise you will just continue to wrap and not move, and you will end up with a really thick stem. And I don't like thick stem because it makes big holes on my cake. Okay, so wrap it all the way to the tip so that you end up with just one stem for your flower. So at this point I will take my flower and basically make sure that they're all in the right position. Just arrange it. And I'm not really big on dusting my flowers with pearl dust. However, if I dust it heavily just like I did here, I would take a sable brush, and this time I would use a sable brush because it absorbs a lot of pearl. And just make sure that you use paper I would take just the cap. I'm just using the cap of my pearl dust because I really don't want a whole lot. Brush it onto your paper and just shimmer the petals or the gum paste with it, so it just has that nice dewy look that most orchids has, but not really to the point where it looks very disco-y, or like one of my students said, it looks like a Disney flower because it's nice and shiny. So here we have our finished flower, and as you can see, one that has the one that we did earlier that's shaped like a paw, and the other one is the one that's shaped like a carrot. So of course you can choose whichever center you prefer.